us. Now, our next speaker and his two co-founders have created a billion-dollar business out of turning millions of people's homes into homes for people like you and I. And so he's the co-founder of Airbnb, he's the chief strategy officer, and he's the chairman of Airbnb China. Please join me in welcoming Nate Blecharczyk. Hey, Nate. How are you? Okay, we can't hear him. I wish I could lip read. Could you?
How about now?
All right, we got you. Great to see you. Thank you for joining us, Nate.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Very loud and clear.
My pleasure.
Great. So I found a photo of you when you were 12 years old, when you started programming, and this was apparently your first job that you got paid for. And did you think then that you'd be running one of the travel's most valuable companies?
Well, I think what I'm most proud of is the very real impact we're having on people. One of my favorite things to do is when I meet hosts or guests, we often do these community meetup events, and I ask them, what does Airbnb mean to you? How has it impacted you? And I hear some of the most heartfelt stories about how someone, saved their home or met their significant other. I could never have imagined impacting people in that way all across the world. And over the last 14 years, more than 1 billion guests have arrived in other people's homes over that period. We have more than 4 million hosts today on the platform. In India, for example, just during the pandemic, new hosts in India have earned 30 million Indian rupees, and more than 30% of those hosts are women. And so that's the kind of impact I'm really proud about, as well as a secondary impact. Of course, tourism has a ripple effect. And so, this travel from the Airbnb community has supported 920,000 jobs in the Asia Pacific region, for example.
Right.
So that's a little bit more indirect, but also something that I have very pride
Right,
of.
and so those numbers are fantastic, admirable for a 14-year-old company. But this pandemic has also made us look at things differently, right? What we value, what we don't, what's essential, what is not, and there's a lot of talk about travel to build back better. And does that mean rethinking how we measure value? That goes beyond the valuations, the stock prices, the numbers. How do you define value now, having gone through what we've gone through?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has highlighted, so many challenges, downstream challenges that exist in society and in the world. And I think all companies should be thinking about how they can rise up and meet those needs. One need that we see there as a kind of downstream impact of the pandemic is loneliness. So many people have been at home, unable to connect with others in a way that they, had in the past. It's one of the reasons why at Airbnb during the pandemic, we chose to really refocus our efforts on building product that fosters community and connection, as opposed to other business ventures that might had to have done with, other aspects of travel that wasn't as focused on community and connection. Another opportunity / challenge we see is that there's a lot of towns, cities trying to rebuild their tourism. And some of these places are a little bit more off the map. They're not as much awareness. And right now people are traveling differently. We can talk about that later, but they're going to rural areas. So we're partnering with communities to help them really showcase what they have to offer and help them be discovered. And we're doing this through our flexible search product. And then finally, there's a lot of folks who are out of work and seeking economic empowerment during this time, more so than ever. And so we continue to tried to educate the broader society about the opportunities that come with hosting, do training specifically to teach hosting. We just did a survey of our Filipino hosts, and 57% of them said that they've been using the income that they've earned through hosting to stay in their homes. So I think this just kind of highlights the role in which a company's product can help with recovering when there's so much need out there right now.
Right. So basically, the ability to really dig deeper into the roots of the community at this time is important. Right. Okay. So please ask questions through the chat. We have a poll coming up too, and I'm intrigued by the dynamic of your three founders. And in a talk that you said that Brian brought vision, Joe brought empathy, and you are the problem solver. So which superpower has been most needed during this crisis? And I'm going to ask the audience poll as well. For all of you out there, which superpower have you had to call on the most during this crisis? Is it patience? Is it courage? Is it empathy? Is it money? Nate, what about you?
Well, we've needed all of those things, in spades during this crisis. So definitely all of the above and more. But what I'll say about the crisis is that it was really a rallying call, not just for Joe, Brian, and I, the founders, but for our executive team and our company. Basically, the rallying call was that everyone needs to stop what they're doing and focus at the problem at hand and really bring all the resources of the company to bear on these actions that we would take. So I think that was the real superpower, was the fact that we're all now working in a focused way in lockstep. The second thing I'll say is just that, in a crisis, it's very easy to have to get pulled in different directions. There's trade-offs to be made and different things that you could be optimizing for. And I think one of the things that helped us was that we had a very clear framework of how we think about our stakeholders. For us, our stakeholders are not just our guests and our hosts, but also the communities in which we operate, of course, our shareholders and our employees. And so every tough decision we had to make, we thought through, how does this impact each of those five stakeholders? And that led us to have, I think, much more thoughtful decisions about how we navigate these things, and also to bring along, our entire company in the process.
All right. So, but you clearly have great product market fit during this time. I mean, seems to be the right product for the right time, right? Private homes, drivable stays, longer stays. How long do you see this trend kind of fueling your growth? And I remember in a talk that you gave, you went for the first 5 years of Airbnb's journey. You basically went from 0 to 9 million guests, right? That was kind of hockey stick growth that you saw in the beginning. So do you expect this kind of hockey stick growth post-pandemic?
Well, I think what we've experienced is becoming the new norm. I don't think travel is ever going back the way it was. In fact, I think what we're witnessing is a travel revolution, a permanent change in how people travel. And I think this change can best be summed up by flexibility. The fact that the line between living and working and travel are all blurring. You can now do these things all at the same time for at least millions of people whose jobs offer this. And I think there is just this huge trend of jobs allowing for that kind of flexibility. And so I think this has huge ramifications for travel. We did a survey just recently and found some very interesting results. We found that 1 in 6 Gen Zers and millennials say that they have basically been working remotely during this time. I mean, not just at home, but while traveling. We found that 1 in 3 folks wanted to do this living anywhere lifestyle after the pandemic, so that this was going to be a permanent change, that many people aspire to work and live and travel in this way. We found that, again, amongst the younger generation, that half of them plan to travel more post-pandemic. And we found that 37% of people say they're going to stay a lot longer when they're traveling. So I think all this points to the fact that people are really going to travel differently long-term in the future. They're going to stay longer, and it's going to become a little bit more of an everyday affair as opposed to something you do once or twice a year. And I think we have thought about how do we adapt our platform to embrace this flexibility. And we've done that by, first and foremost, our flexible dates and flexible matching and flexible destinations features, recognizing that before people had a specific destination in mind, they knew they were going to go this week because that's when they had their vacation time. And it was a very fixed kind of mindset. And now, people have this flexibility to be inspired. And so we're having a lot more open-ended search capability on our platform.
Right.
The other thing I'll just say is, again, people are staying much longer. We saw that in Q2, half of our nights were for reservations that were 1 week or longer. And we found that 1 in 5 of our nights were for reservations that were at least a month or longer in Q2.
Right, Nate, but how about you personally? Will you change the way you do business travel? So for example, if I were to invite you to Singapore to speak at a conference, would you do that, or would you rather do this now?
Well, I really have enjoyed my past trips to Singapore. So I really do hope next time we do this conference, I can be there in person. But I do think that, the 1 or 2 night business trips for a quick meeting make a lot less sense. I think the travel we're going to see is for longer stays where you're doing brainstorming sessions or going back to HQ. And that there's just going to be a big disproportionate shift in those kinds of trips. We're seeing it already. We see that amongst our long-term stays on Airbnb, the share of them that are self-reported to be for business travel has increased 2.5x over the last year. We're also seeing that travel amongst small businesses is resilient, or at least more resilient, I should say. It was for us about 43% of our business before the pandemic in Q2 of 2019. It's about 55% of our business travel business in Q2 of 2021. So, I do think it's going to be longer in duration when it happens.
Right. I mean, we see clearly the same trend, even in Singapore, which has been really locked down. The business travel has really been done by entrepreneurs and SMEs that had no choice but to be out there, traveling and hustling for business. So to the polling on the superpower, the majority said patience. That was the superpower that they've had to call on, followed by empathy, and then followed by courage. And money was right at the bottom, which is good news. So you are clearly a strategist. You blend business, product, and data, and that's why you're the problem solver. So you have created, or you working on the Airbnb City Portal, right? And that's described as a first of its kind solution for communities partnering with Airbnb. So tell us, how will this portal help rebuild communities and tourism in a better way?
Well, the City Portal is meant to be a one-stop shop for governments as it pertains to Airbnb. So all the kinds of questions they might have as it pertains to Airbnb, such as, what is the presence of Airbnb in my community in terms of the numbers and data? How do I administer a simple permitting scheme? How is Airbnb handling COVID in this community? Any issues around noise or nuisance issues? There are substantive modules within the City Portal that contain real product functionality integrated with our platform. It's meant to be a power tool for cities that's available to them off the shelf, meaning a whole bunch of custom programming doesn't have to be done. It's ready to go. We can create a login for you, and you can have access to this functionality. This is all inspired by more than a decade worth of work. We've been working closely with cities for a long time now, very much on a individualized basis. And what we learned through that there's a set of common needs. And now we've basically productized that into something that is ready to go off the shelf We launched just a little over a year ago with initially 18 pilot partners. We now have more than 100 partners worldwide using it, all around the world, from Paris to Tasmania. And it's really part of our broader effort to work with governments and communities. Again, that's one of our very important stakeholders. And over the last year, this has also included efforts to do vaccination attestations in places like Malaysia. We also debuted something we call the 5-step enhanced cleaning process related to COVID safety and educating our hosts on best practices around that. We implemented a global party ban because we saw that when there were lockdowns, people were not able to go out to some of the traditional venues to have good times. But we didn't want that kind of stuff happening in homes either. And so we were able to make efforts on that.
Okay,
and we debuted a neighborhood support line in many new markets.
Right. So this Airbnb city portal is meant to give cities the self-service tools to kind of rebuild their tourism. In a way, I guess it's also trying to counter the backlash that you were getting from communities in Amsterdam or Barcelona that felt that Airbnb was changing the shape of their city for the local residents.
It's meant to be a one-stop shop. So that means, all these issues, there's rich functionality that's available for cities. And that includes rebuilding tourism. We're partnered with quite a number of DMOs on regrowing tourism and driving travelers to those destinations.
Okay.
In Japan, we're working with the Nagano Tourism Organization. In Korea, where we have some partners as well.
All right. So let's go through some rapid fire, okay? And when you were 14, you were paid $1,000 for a programming job. Do you remember what you did with that $1,000, Nate?
I'm pretty sure I got a second phone line, because back then, to access the internet, it was for me over a dial-up modem in my house. I was at home, only had the primary landline that everyone used. So I was literally getting knocked off the internet when my parents wanted to make phone calls. So the first order of business was to get a second phone line and get a connection to the internet that way.
All right. Do you want to go to space like some billionaires have done? And I think William Shatner has just done his gig to space. Do you want to go to space?
Well, I've always been a Star Trek fan, and it is really impressive to see all the innovation that's happening. But really, what I'm most excited about is just the opportunities to rebuild tourism here on Earth.
Absolutely. All right, and let's talk about who will build the first hotel in space. So, do you see will there be an Airbnb in space?
Well, I never would have guessed that we'd be here today. So anything is possible.
Absolutely. And Nate, we have 12 startups pitching later for our startup competition. What's your advice to them? Because everybody wants to be an Airbnb.
Well, with Airbnb, we started this all just simply by trying to solve our own problem. And that was a simple problem of how do we pay our rent? And so we didn't have this big grand business plan. It was really just a personal kind of problem, as well as some insights in terms of how cool it was to host people in your home. So, I'd say, what is your personal connection to your idea? That's really important to understand. And second is the team. As mentioned earlier, Joe, Brian, and I were each very different. And that's our strength, that as a complementary set of founders, we can pretty much conquer any challenge, I would say.
Right. And how do you hold on to that personal connection to that idea as you scale and you take on billions of dollars of funding? How do you hold on to that personal connection?
Well, it needs to start with yourself. And so that means using the product and putting yourself in the shoes of customers as often as possible. And for Airbnb, that means not just traveling on Airbnb, but also hosting. And I've hosted more than 750 guests in my home over the last decade. And so, that has given me tons of unique insights into what consumers are thinking, small bugs with the product. I think, using your own product and living the experience that your customers are having is absolutely critical.
Okay, and so final question. I mean, Nate, this is your first time speaking to an Asia Pacific audience at WiT. You know, is there a message that you want to share, send to the destinations in Asia Pacific or the small businesses or the communities here on how, you know, they can rebuild tourism, not just with Airbnb, but just rebuild tourism in a general way?
Well, you know, I think what we've seen in other countries is that there is a lot of pent-up demand, and I know that in Asia Pacific, you know, a lot of progress is being made over the last couple of weeks in terms of corridors reopening, and so I imagine there's a great appetite for travel ahead in Asia Pacific, and you know, going back to what we just all experienced, you know, being at home, very lonely and isolating. I think people are going to want to connect with other people. I think people are going to want to have meaningful experiences together. And so I think showcasing how that can happen in your destination is a tremendous opportunity. And so I think about it in those terms.
Well, thank you, Nate. And next year, we'll see you in Singapore, right? We'll see you in Singapore.
I look forward to that. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Nate. Thank you.
Until then.
Thank you for that conversation. Thank you.